Thank you so much, Manfred, and good morning or good
this
afternoon
mic,
or good evening, everybody. I know that there are many people around the globe watching this session. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a real pleasure to be back to RealCorp after a couple of years, which I missed. And also, I have to say that aside from my Isaac Association,
this mic right?
Okay. Aside from my association with RealCorp, which is still very much alive, this year we are going to Doha for another World Planning Congress. I hope we can meet with you in person over there as well. But also I am active as a professor at Gdańsk University of Technology, which Manfred already presented me like that. But also since a couple of months I'm playing the role of Gdańsk City Architect, so it's so jumping into the shoes of the public bureaucrat, honestly speaking, it's bringing an entirely different perspective to that what we have been dealing with before. And this is really a kind of eye-opening experience which can really bridge not only theory and practice, but also academia and real planning life in the very complicated political and economic environments, which I hope can be a good starting point for my presentation. I don't know how much time do we have, Manfred, for that? Because 20 minutes, all right, okay. So let me just, because I have to scroll that down in this way, sorry about that. Technology is not always perfect. We have to understand that actually we are dealing with a kind of paradigm change, or we are at the very beginning of developing the new paradigm, which is not yet there. And this new paradigm for urban development or for city development, of course, is based on everything which we already had before, and there are books and volumes and theories about that, which I don't want to quote right now, although it will be, by the way, a very interesting overview of that, what was before and what actually has been in now. But I think what is important is that we can actually kind of set the stage and say that there is still ongoing debate between the modern and postmodern approaches to planning, which is still reflected not only in manifestos, but also in practice. And also it is, in many cases, focused on the form of cities. But also what is very important is that this is not only urban form, which, by the way, is underestimated by many of our planning colleagues also, but also it's associated with social and economic environments. So that what we have heard from Alfonso a couple of minutes ago is a perfect example of those bridging those different things together, although there is much more. But what is interesting is that this picture showing the two of the most probably influential thinkers about how the urban environment should be developed in the early 20th century. I think that this discourse between Jane Jacobs and Robert Moses, I mean, it's still there, you know. I mean, again, it's a very interesting observation, not only from the academic environment, but also from the real-life practice, that we are still in the middle of this fight. And this is something which may be quite unusual for the people who have read all these books already 20 or 30 years ago. But actually, the practice is still there, and the real discourse is still there. And basically, we still have not yet gone out from that. So this way of thinking about the modernistic or modern urban development, I mean, there can be different names for this used, which was pictured in the 50s and 60s, is being implemented in the 90s and early 200s, okay? And there is not so much difference, okay? This picture was actually taken from the graffiti which was painted on the wall of the Department of Urban Environment at the Gdańsk University of Technology, depicting the future of the modern urban in the 50s. And this is the real-life screenshot from Warsaw, Poland, taken just a couple of years ago. Basically, no difference, right, as we can see. So we are still there. We are still dealing with all these things. And of course, there is a lot of the additional items which are on the agenda. Of course, we discussed sustainability, social inclusion, environmental resistance, energy issues, as one of our keynote speakers today pointed out quite extensively. But also there are topics associated with suburbanization, regeneration, transformation of cities, or development of those megacities or super cities, as Alfonso argued for a couple of minutes ago. But also, what is interesting is that they are often separate the discussion on public participation and on economic development. And all those things, unfortunately, not necessarily are being brought together. And this is something which provoked me to define the title of today's presentation, that actually we are still not yet having the new planning paradigm. We are still not yet having the kind of the new doctrine, as we can call it. But we are still living in between, in the times in between the already to some extent gone modernistic times and still not yet fully emerged new times. I'm not brave enough to frame it in the proper words, how it's gonna look like, but it definitely will have to include all these elements, although we still do not have a kind of clear picture how this is gonna look like. And of course we are trying. We are trying to transform our cities, we are trying to develop very different parts of the city. Sometimes we are even very successful in that. This is the case from Gdańsk, my home city, but here in Vienna you also have a lot of the very successful urban transformation projects, although these are mostly the real estate projects, just as exactly as this one which you can see of that. At the same time, quite recently there is a lot of arguments and a lot of practice emerging around the development of the people-oriented approach. And all these terms associated with stimulating participation, social inclusion, making people part of the decision-making process is extremely important because it has never been present before Robert Moses' times, honestly speaking. But what is interesting is that it is going in sometimes surprising directions. Okay, sometimes it's going in being that we want to be popular, that we want to just deal with the popular kind of issues and decisions. But also we want to stimulate creativity and all this kind of the things. And sometimes we are just forgetting about all the rest of the people who are not that ready to participate or who are not that ready to be part of the creative sector. And so this is an important thing to remember, I think, that we are not all the same and that there are very different standpoints, so to speak, in this case. Also, there is lack of understanding of implementation and development mechanisms. Actually, I guess we have all been there discussing with the general public how the particular developments are being delivered, and we were all struck by the fact that actually people really do not understand that it's actually the private sector which is moving the city around. Okay, whether you like it or not. In most of the cases, this is the case. Okay, but when you talk to on some Facebook or Instagram or wherever you are talking of those things about, basically the perception is different. Is that I mean all these urban development processes which we are dealing with are just coming from somewhere, and we don't know from where. Okay? And we expect they are going to come, but we don't want to see the private sector. Okay? So I think it's a very important part which has to be also put on the agenda. What is also interesting is that this people-oriented approach, I'm sorry to say that, has very little real influence on real-life processes. And for now, I mean, it is intended to have, but in many cases it doesn't really have a lot of the real-life influence on the real-life processes. And there is little actually discussion on how cities are actually developing and are being developed, which means that we are talking on one thing and real life goes in different direction. Okay? And this is something which is the result of that. So we got this kind of very interesting approaches towards making this kind of creative districts. And this is a case from the creative district in Rain from Coventry. So you might expect, that when you are in UK it's raining. Okay, so this was the case. But also you might get a kind of artistic district, and this is the case from Gdańsk, from my hometown again, where on the former shipyard area kind of artistic installations have been done. But honestly speaking, what does it have to do with the regular city life? Okay, this would be a very interesting question. So from that point of view, I would say we do need the new planning doctrine, or the new planning paradigm, we can also call it. I mean, I'm not stuck to one term or another. But I would say that this would serve as the platform, and we would need it as a platform of the interplay between the people-oriented and the real-life approaches and issues. This could also provide a much better needed integrated approach, and I'm very much in favor of the integrated approach in planning and the integrated approach in development, which many of my colleagues have been talking about in this or that sense. But also, what is very important, it should also bring back urban design and design as such to the table, and it should bring it, bridge it with economy and with social issues. And I'm very much in love with the new concept which has been emerging in Europe since a couple of months. This is the new initiative of the European Commission, which I guess many of you are very familiar with, which is the concept of the new European Bauhaus, which is again calling for kind of bringing back all these things together and creating more attractive urban environments. So in the end, we got various new developments with a lot of the different issues to be discussed about. But what are the key topics in this process, and how can we kind of dismantle this concept of the new planning doctrine, and what are the three things which are the key topics in this process? First of all is the landscape of cities. So what will be the nature of the city? The second one is what will be the development of the city, how our visions will be implemented. It's a very important part of the game, and so far I don't think many people have been talking about that. We have been talking about concepts, about sustainability, energy issues, public participation, social inclusion, but not a single word about who is gonna build all of that, okay, and how that will be developed. And from my point of view, this is absolutely crucial part of the whole story. If we do not include this part, we are still dreaming about different realities, so to speak. And finally, how do we decide about all these above mentioned issues? How we discuss these issues and how the decision-making process should look like. It's also extremely important, and I'm gonna bring a couple of the examples to this table. So first of all, well, what will be the nature of this our city of the future? I just brought here 4 different examples, but also a kind of burning question how current and future COVID-like events are gonna influence our cities, okay? We are all wearing these fantastic face masks. Thank you very much, Manfred, for providing some of the proper ones, you know. But what is important is that most probably this is not the last one, okay? I mean, we are gonna survive it, we are gonna get out stronger from the pandemic, but we have to make sure that we are ready for the next one, okay? And what will be the future of the city when we have the next one, okay? So are we gonna live in this new urbanist paradise somewhere on the outskirts of the existing structures? Are we gonna just transform our cities to make it a 15 minutes city, as it is being argued and developed? Are we gonna live in the future digital city, which I just took the Blade Runner screenshot for this particular story. I hope this is not in violation of the copyrights and this kind of the things. Or are we gonna live in the cities as we are living in right now, but they will be just a bit different, okay? So this is a kind of burning question on that, what do we want? The second thing is, how shall we discuss the future of our cities? Shall we do this through the master plans and kind of all these top-down rigid approaches, or not so rigid approaches? Or are we doing this through the often extremely populistic participatory approaches? And again, there is a lot of literature on that, how populistic and how complicated these processes can get. But also what is interesting is that we have got a third part to this to this issue, which means the dispute between political stakeholders. And this is the lesson I learned over the last 6 months serving as the Gdańsk City Architect, when I just realized that actually the biggest fights are between the municipal government and the and the elective bodies at the level of the particular districts, which you would have never expected if you are not inside this kind of the story, okay? So these guys who are already on the top of the shelf, they are fighting with the guys who want to jump on the top of the shelf, okay? And this is interesting story about that. So the question is also how the development of the social and just city concepts will influence that. I mean, what is the interrelation, how this will be done? So are we dealing with master plans, or are we dealing with the populistic fights? Again, something taken from the science fiction movies, which I, as a planner, I love personally. I know time.
No, I make time is over. I have to leave.
Okay. So how shall we implement this future city vision? So this is the third part of the whole story. So again, this is the question: who is gonna build all of this future? Will this be the private sector? If yes, what will be the role in interrelations? Shall it be done by the public intervention? And then how shall we generate money in the municipal budget for all of that? Shall we mobilize people resources? But the question is whether we have enough resources in the particular people's pockets to develop that. Just when we were walking to this session here, we have been discussing with our colleagues the enormous prices of the real estates right now, which are booming. And I guess nobody here would be able to pay for 1 square meter for the new apartment or house with our salary, right? So the question is, you know, can we actually count on these people's resources, okay? From my point of view, it's not that simple. But if not any of that, so then who is gonna pay for all of this? It's a kind of extremely important question. I don't have a good answer to that, but definitely the problem is there, okay? And also it's important how the fiscal and economic situation of cities will influence that, okay? As we know, through the COVID and COVID-related issues, the fiscal situation of the cities is not getting better, okay? On the other hand, we can say it's getting much worse. So my question is, will the future cities will be just the monuments of the past surrounded by the palaces of the corporations, or will it be something completely different, okay? It's really hard to say. So now we are coming to the most crucial question coming from this analysis of the elements which are gonna build the future planning doctrine, which means how are we supposed to plan our future city? And here comes another very important thing, which means that we are not planning for the city that we will have, because we have no idea what kind of city we will have, because all these variables put together can produce really the huge amount of the possible scenarios. But actually, we are planning for the city that we want to have, okay? So this is another dimension to the whole thing, okay? Because we are not speculating on that exactly how it will be, but we can speculate on that what we want the future city to be. And of course, there are two different sets of concepts. First of all, there are our ideas associated with the ideal or must-have features of the urban space. And on the other hand, on the tools and instruments allowing the successful implementation. As we know from any strategic planning effort, if we are dreaming the fantastic vision for your life, city, municipality, region, whatever, this is just a dream as long as you do not put it together with the implementation mechanism. The same is exactly here about dreaming the future of the city and so on. So when you are looking at these models of some future nice, interesting transformation projects, we have to also think about these implementation mechanisms, which are very important, in order not to get something like this. I mean, both cases are taken from London. The first one is more or less interesting case of the King's Cross project, and the second one is the City Island in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the London Docklands. And as you can see, this is a kind of monument of uneven development, not balanced, not planned, and not really managed. Okay, so same city, two completely different approaches. And of course, you may personally like this architecture if you are the fan of skyscrapers, and you may like this kind of creative district which has been created here. But in that case, you still have to understand that this is the issue which has to be dealt with. So that provokes another question: what will be the future planning? And from my point of view, since we are completely unsure about that, what would be the future for our cities and what would be the future for our urban environments, we should also think about the future planning in a more diversified way. So we should think that our future planning should be more diversified, should be responding to the upcoming needs and ever-changing situations, and focusing on big issues, although dealing with the small needs of the particular stakeholders and people, or even very small groups of the stakeholders, because our cities are the places where we have got both big issues and big interests, as well as the very small issues and the very small interests of the very small groups of stakeholders. So from that, the new model of the planning practice most probably is going to emerge, which will be abandoning the so-called overarching approach based on comprehensive urban planning only. And I'm personally advocating for the emergence of the network planning, understood as the big bag full of planning exercises, and actually that every planning problem emerging in the future will be dealt with in another way. Again, let me refer to my own practice, very recent practice from being the municipal city architect. We have been developing 6 or 7 different projects over this couple of months of my service, and actually each of them has been dealt with completely differently, regarding the size, regarding the group of stakeholders, regarding the approach and issues associated with public participation, regarding the, how all these things are being dealt with, and so on. So basically, even if per se they are supposed basically to serve as urban development of some area and so on, each of them was developed in the same city, within the same time period, in a completely different way. So that actually means that every planning problem will be dealt with in other ways, and there are no blueprint solutions anymore. So we have to really consider this new planning doctrine as something which is based on participation, of course, which is based on this kind of discussions and so on, which is a kind of starting point for that. But we have to understand that all these elements have to be included in the specifically crafted planning approach, which are unique to the particular places. So, by the way, which is a kind of side reflection, it actually makes our students very happy, because that means that our students are going to have a lot of jobs in the future, and no artificial intelligence is going to substitute them, because the artificial intelligence can only learn what it has seen so far, and in that case we are planning for the unseen and for the something which have been not dealing with. So in the end, I would say we need also the new model of planner, who is flexible and inventive regarding the ways to deal with problems, who is able to deal with much greater set of planning tools and instruments, not only design or not only, in example, dealing with the social or environmental issues, who is also able to understand how these tools and instruments can be used, and also how how this can be used in a very much different way according to the nature of the situation, problem, or site. So we have to bring together people from different places, with different experience, with different cultures, with different places. This is an example from our university. But also it poses a number of the challenges for the planning science, dealing with, which means that the planning science is dealing with the complex nature of the organism called the future city, and it should deal with that. But also it should be equipped with various tools, techniques, and concepts that can be employed at the same time, not only to analyze and to look at the particular things, but also to design solutions and to deal with the problems which are not yet in our minds. So that also means that we are demanding a much more open-minded urban planner, and this is a very basic message I'd like to leave you guys with today. And making that is, of course, is an understandable, working, and neat way that will be a real art, the new art of planning, as on this book on the first time was presented. And in the end, I'd like to say we still love our old cities, but we are planning for the future cities. So some final conclusions. I mean, if you are feeling stuck with your face mask, so now it's time to wake up and to read out the final conclusions. No more blueprints, no more fixed procedures. We need the universal planners. We need to be flexible. and the future of planning is completely unpredictable, but I'm more than sure it will be extremely exciting. Thank you very much for your participation.